Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining this evening. My name is Ryan Miller. I have a few colleagues on the phone here today. Greg Coleridge, Dolores Guernica, and Janice Richards as well. We're meeting here this evening to do a bit of training. Following a conversation we had back in December, we decided that as the 118th Congress gets sworn in, now is as good a time as any to begin the outreach process to congressional representatives. Our goal is co-sponsorship of HJR 48, the We the People Amendment, which, for those not familiar, asserts that artificial entities such as corporations do not have constitutional rights and that money is not free speech, seeking to end corporate personhood and remove big money from elections. Over the course of the next 50 minutes or so, Greg and Dolores are going to lead us through a training on lobbying Congress people, with the goal that each of us in attendance and as many others who are interested can take this information, contact their representative, educate them about the issues that we are grappling against in hopes of getting their support in co-sponsoring HJR 48. With that said, I will turn it over to Greg and Dolores, who will lead us through the training this evening. Thanks so much, you two.
Great. Well, greetings, everyone. I'm Greg Coleridge, one of the co-directors at Move to Amend, and Dolores and I have put together, can you bring that up? Let me see, I guess, share my screen. Let's see here if I can do this. I had this up.
If not, we can share from my screen.
Okay.
All right. 1 second. You have to make me co-host first.
There you go.
Perfect. You see that all right?
Yes.
Hopefully everyone can see that. Great.
Confirmed.
So this evening, what we're going to do is just give a little background of Move to Amend, define what lobbying is and the goals of it. And I'm sure with this crowd, much of this is already familiar with. Some to do's and to not do's, but mostly to do's around scheduling a lobby meeting, forming your group, who should be in it, who basically maybe should not be, organizing itself for the meeting, prior to the meeting, what maybe optional activities there are, not in any way mandatory, but just something to consider depending on who it is and what kind of relationship you may already have with your representative, the actual agenda holding the meeting itself, the testimonials that may or may not take place, and then what should happen following the meeting itself, and then some quick Q&A and discussion and commitments of where do we go from here. So, all right, first, just a little background of Move to Amend. As people may know, we are a coalition, have been so since 2010, when we got our start, of hundreds of organizations and literally nearly 500,000 individuals committed to social and economic justice, ending corporate rule, and building a vibrant democracy that is generally accountable to people, not corporate interests. When we say hundreds of organizations, we have over 600, actually now 700 organizations that are co-sponsors, as well as over 700 communities and states that have taken positions, either be via council resolutions or ballot initiatives. We have some foundational principles and values that we have shared since day one, that being, again, 2010, on the very day of the Sins United Supreme Court decision. And they are these 5: a commitment to anti-oppression and solidarity organizing to get from where we are now to where we want to go. We've got to, I mean, just not just from a philosophical standpoint, but from a practical standpoint to build power. We can't do it alone. We've got to forge connections with organizations, with others who are of similar mind, and in particular, disproportionately are and have been on the front line, sort of taking the punches in the gut or between the eyes, metaphorically, in all the various forms of injustices, of violence, of undemocratic nature across the board, from the local to the national. So anti-oppression and solidarity organizing, really important, as is relatedly movement building and forming coalitions. We can't do it alone. And so coalition building in terms of number two is sort of vertical from the national level, trying to connect with ally organizations at the national level for the purpose of trying to build a movement. And that movement is trying to build power, because we're not going to get anywhere unless ultimately we have power. And you only have power by either having ultimately organized money or organized people. And if you don't have the one, you sure as heck better have the other. And so that's what we're trying to do, is build ultimately a democracy movement that is made up of individuals, but also of allied organizations. But that kind of coalition building doesn't just go horizontally, it goes vertically. And that's why we focus on grassroots organizing. We have a very active local presence in many communities around the country. And so that's really where the power originates, by people on the ground dealing with issues that are emergent, but also may be present in what it is they're trying to accomplish to improve their quality of life where they are. And by coming together and forming organization and achieving success, we hope educationally they're making connections with ultimately the issues that we're working on, because, you know, quite frankly, truth be told, we're not going to ultimately get where we want to go, because again, it's hard to get past first base given the role and power of money in elections and the role and power of corporate entities having the ability to subvert, preempt, and dare I say, trump the ability of us at the grassroots and even people at the national level to get what we want. We've got to organize both at a national level and at the grassroots. We're also dedicated to political education, trying to get on the other side of the learning curve. Extremely important to do that, because I don't know about you, I never learned about many of these issues growing up or even in school, particularly around corporate rule, corporate constitutional rights, how money became defined as free speech, which is bizarre, hard to get your head wrapped around it. So we've got to make sure that we constantly keep ourselves on the other side of that learning curve. And lastly, this interdependence, interconnection between political and economic independence, so that we are both politically and economically sovereign, able to make sure that we focus on issues and strategies in ways that respond and in ways that support people on the ground, on the front lines, and are not beholden to those entities like corporations or, you know, big bad, huge foundations that are inside the Beltway, political parties, and all the other kind of front groups out there that can pull strings or push agendas and, you know, force people to tone down or moderate or temper what needs to be done. So those are our principles and values. Our goals are twofold: to pass this thing we call the We the People Amendment, to make crystal clear the two components that artificial entities, those being things like business corporations, nonprofits, and the like, do not have inalienable constitutional rights, which were meant and intended solely, exclusively for human beings, and that equally bizarre is this constitutional doctrine that money is free speech. So the We the People Amendment would abolish both of those doctrines. But secondly, and relatedly, and even more fundamentally, to provoke discussion and organizing about how to use the We the People Amendment, if you will, as a stepping stone to deal with more broadly and more deeply many other changes constitutionally that need to be made. Amending the Constitution, as people may know, can be done twofold, in two ways. As of now, heretofore, it's only been done through this first way, through Congress. So the 27 amendments that we already have only been achieved through this two-step process of 2/3 of both houses of Congress, that being the House and the Senate, must pass whatever it is that's being proposed. In our case, H.R. 48, the We the People Amendment. Once that happens, then 3/4 of the states must ratify that. Now, that is how the 27 amendments so far have been passed. But there is this second way that we're not saying should be done at this point, or that we should seriously consider at this point, but we should not completely forget and ignore the prospect somewhere down the line of this if conditions switch and warrant this possibility, which actually, all things considered, are, if you think about it pretty closely and pretty deeply, is more democratic, which is 2/3 of state legislatures call for a specific amendment convention that would focus on this amendment and this amendment alone, which would be 34 states. And if and when that happens, and then they deal with this amendment, then 3/4 of state legislatures would have to ratify that, which amounts to 38 states. So we're not saying move to amend that we support that measure at this point. We don't, given the political realities. But that has historically, it should be said, been used as a threat. It was a threat by those who were successful ultimately in passing the 17th Amendment that got rid of the election of senators by state legislatures. There were many states that said, no, we want to have a constitutional convention to do that because Congress isn't acting. And that was a threat that was taken seriously enough that basically forced Congress to do that. And I think the abolishing of the poll tax was another example of that. And so there may be others. So we think that this constitutional convention idea conceivably could be used as a lever to at least threaten Congress, if they don't act, to do the right thing, to call for this convention. But we're not calling for that at this point.
Quick question.
Yep.
How do you keep it from becoming a much wider rewriting of the Constitution?
Well, basically, you're just working state legislature by state legislature to say, this is what we're calling for, period. And anything outside of it is not what we're calling for. And once they pass, that says, we want a constitutional convention here in Texas or wherever for A, and A alone, not C, D, Z, and Q, then that's where it stands. If they want B, C, Z, and Q, then they would have to go back and pass something separate from that, in addition to that, or instead of that. But that's how basically it would work. Our strategy basically is a couple of things. We're constantly working to build a coalition to reach out to other organizations that are working on issues affected by corporate power and corporate rule, which basically includes pretty much virtually any organization you can consist of and think of and talk about and maybe be a part of, working for economic justice, for political justice, for environmental justice, in many cases, even for social justice. So almost every organization, a heck of a lot of them, are in play. Work in addition, complementary, to build a broad and diverse multiracial and intergenerational movement, absolutely essential to reach out to those most directly affected, both because it's the right thing to do, in addition because, again, people who are on the front lines, who are people of color or low income or different sexual orientation or physical ability, have been, relatively speaking, most taken advantage of and treated unjustly. And then strategically, quite honestly, if you don't work with these other groups, then the powers to be have always used divide and conquer and, using the isms and the other as successful ways to splinter. And so, we just can't afford that. And they've been successful at doing that approach of dividing and conquer. So it's absolutely essential that on the front end, we act in solidarity. And so we're committed to not just activism of doing one-off events, but ongoing events that build. That's what community organizing is about. And one of the things we've done for a very long time as a strategy is grassroots organizing, specifically to pass local and state resolutions, organizational endorsements, calling for H.R. 48. which is amounted to between organizations that have endorsed and communities that have passed resolutions about, in fact, just about 1,500. Our structure at Move to Amend, we have a grassroots structure of various affiliates. Those are organized groups that are at a local level. We have individual advocates. Those would be sort of those individuals that are planting seeds, getting the word out as individuals that may already be a part of an organization who just want to take this work into that organization and help sort of broaden the understanding and make the connections between the work that they're doing and the strategic, expanding, saying there's some other strategies out there, not just to respond and react to problems and conditions, but to propose, not just to oppose, but to propose. And that's what the We the People Amendment's about. And then we have these things called working groups that, again, are groups that are already established, that already may be working on 6 or 7 things, and that they would adopt the We the People Amendment as the 8th thing, let's say. And that they would, when it comes time to appropriately lobby, that would be something they would do. Nationally, we have a team of board and staff and interns. We have things called these caucuses and committees. So we have a labor caucus, and we've had an interfaith caucus. We now have an environmental, or we call it an eco caucus. So these are individuals throughout the organization that are specifically geared and made up of individuals concerned about those specific issues or from those specific constituencies who are working on trying to make connections between that issue or that constituency and abolishing corporate rule, corporate constitutional rights, and money in elections, and then just various coalition projects. And then finally, before I turn it over to Dole, the amendment itself, HER 48, which is what it has been numbered in the previous 5 congressional sessions where it has been introduced, and it will be that number again. We've been trying to sort of reserve that number for the intentionality of trying to have, some sort of consistency and some kind of brand, so that in each session, we're not in one session, HER 12, and then in the next session, HER 3642. It's hard to sort of maintain some sense of who we are. So we try to hold on to that number each and every time, because technically in Congress, it's not, we call it the We the People Amendment, but in Congress, when they talk between one another, they talk about it in terms of HCR 48. So in trying to educate and advocate within Congress, it's important that they sort of develop a certain consistency. And so when HCR 48 is mentioned, there's a certain understanding, oh, I know what that is. That's this effort to try to abolish corporate constitutional rights and money as speech, or specifically as it says in these sections. How's this for a radical notion? Article 1 saying artificial entities such as corporations do not have constitutional rights, that only people are persons, a real radical concept, right? And second, that money is not free speech. Money's property, and those who have money should be deemed as holding property, not speech, because if money is speech, those who have the most money have the most speech. Not a real good definition of anything approaching real self-governance, democracy, self-determination, what have you. And then this third section, just to make crystal clear that when we talk about this amendment, we're not saying that this is going to be an abridgment or a kibosh in any way of freedom of the press. Because quite honestly, a lot of press mediums in this country, do they not, are owned by large multinational corporations. So up to this point, we have had upwards of 95 sponsors. That was in the last session, the 117th. When we get this introduced in the 118th session, which will happen very shortly, we hope to have more than that in the House. And you can go to movetoamend.org/amendment to see the list of our original sponsor, Pramila Jayapal from the state of Washington, and the other 94 co-sponsors. All of those are available by going to that link. So at this point, we just wanted to ask you, it may not be easy if you wanted to just stop at the moment, the sharing of the screen, and give people particularly, I've already got a sense that Janice, you're in District 10. Susan, your rep is Chip Roy, is that right? So we just want to get a sense of who has what reps. And Janice, who's your current rep?
That's really interesting because I'm in three places. One of them is Milam County, which is in District 17, whatever. Anyway, I just looked it up. It's Pete Sessions, and I just heard him speaking on NPR. So it was nice to get a sense of his voice. God knows we've heard his name forever, but I'm willing to go see him and create a grassroots underneath him, because I'm actually kind of living in Milam County right now. But District
Okay.
10 doesn't include Milam County. I'm living 1 mile away from Burleson County, which is in my district, 13 counties. So, and I'm wanting to access all of those guys.
Okay,
And-
cool.
Yeah.
All right, so
and-
you've got quite a number.
well, I've got
essentially.
quite a number, and then let's include Houston because I'm here right now.
Yeah. Okay,
I'm a state trotter.
okay.
but
And yeah, all right.
Fortifying myself in agriculture and in connection with these guys on whatever the salient issues are. But agriculture is going to be really big.
Okay,
for
how
me.
about where you live? Who's your congressperson? Where you actually?
Where
You're
I'm
voting. Who do you vote for?
I
Who do you vote for? In what district?
I live in the new District 38.
And
So
who's that rep?
the Republican was elected. I don't remember his
Oh,
name.
okay, but it's District 38.
That's my actual district where
Got
I
it.
vote.
Okay,
Yeah.
and Ryan?
I am also in the Texas 21st with Susan. That is
Oh, okay.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah. I'm
That's
at
District 21, huh?
21. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm a little slice of South Austin that gets
Got it.
moved in to the pack and stack.
Okay, we just wanted to get a sense of who was where and before Dolores. Start it. Go for it.
All right, let me reshare the screen. Okay, can you see that okay?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, so starting out, who has lobbied Congress before, a congressperson, by raise of hands? Oh, wow, okay. That's great then. So most of y'all know kind of what, what to do, what the goals of it are. Then I can go through this, but we're gonna kind of like talk it out more of what challenges do you feel like you have when lobbying your congressperson, or any questions that you've had specific to your congressperson now versus what you've done before. You can kind of, anyone who wants to share.
Well, I never did anything hard. I lobbied Lloyd Doggett. And it was like, talking to myself.
Yeah.
So, what I would be interested in doing is, I don't have a clue as to how to talk to Chip Roy without, becoming, starting cussing at him. Which might be the kind of language he understands. I mean, that's the way he speaks, is in, bombacity and that kind of thing. That's his ballpark. No, I don't know how to do anything hard. And that's what I'd like to learn how to do, like how in the world to talk to a Chuck Roy, a Chip Roy. I have no idea how to do that.
Right.
I just want to hit him. So,
Mhm.
I wouldn't advise doing that.
No,
in a
I'm
meeting.
not that stupid. I'm just telling you, the way, if he'd start
Yeah.
talking, I would just want to slap his face.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, that's not helpful. I realize.
I mean, it's valid. Sorry, someone was.
Yeah, I was just going to say, maybe for the purposes of those who may watch this recording later, you could assume that we are all beginners.
Peaceful
and-
people who would never do that.
Yeah, we are
Peaceful.
peaceful beginners.
Right,
Yes.
right.
Exactly. Okay. And Janice, do you want to?
Yeah, I'm sticking my toe in the water in District 10, and it's
Mhm.
conservative Republican counties, and I'm having tremendous success with bashing multinational corporations. They hate them as much as I do. And it's fun talking to them about that, because the minute I do, they get very animated, very excited. Now, Chip Roy won't, because he's collecting money. But what I would do with Pete Sessions and Chip Roy, if I were talking to them, would be to connect, listen to his speeches and pretty much repeat to him what he says and what he considers to be important, at least for show, and just say how we will support those things, because we will support his voters to vote for him if he votes for this amendment for the reasons that he would be willing to say. So I'm just learning their language, really.
And I think that's really smart and strategic, honestly. I find that a lot of times if you're talking to someone who you might not have a lot of common with in terms of political background, find something that they do relate to, especially when it comes to corporate power. A lot of people don't want money in politics. And, I think you can do some research to see where your specific congressperson is on that. And try to kind of relate what they are about back to this issue. And I will just kind of go through this for a second. But I just wanted to say that I think that's really smart, Janice, that you do that. So I like to say that lobbying is kind of like any other meeting. You want to have goals, you want to have a agenda, you want to have people that are relevant in the conversation, and you want to try to speak to your congressperson in ways that they can relate and understand. So again, like if your congressperson is very much not someone that you'd usually get along with, you don't even have to try. You can, talk to them about this issue that you are trying to get them to co-sponsor. And so for any lobby meeting right now, the main goal is to become an original co-sponsor of HJR 48. So that's the goal that you can keep grounded in. And you can also sign up at our website for this campaign, for this congressional session. And then just like the basics of doing any lobby meeting or any meeting in general. Ask for a scheduler, try to do email follow-ups, ask for a meeting with a representative, and be prepared to discuss why it's important to meet with them. The goal is 30 minutes, be flexible time and date, and ask also when you'll have an answer. So when you call saying, hey, I want to talk to you about becoming a co-sponsor of HJR 48, I think this is relevant, one sentence, and just say if they can set aside 30 minutes to talk to you. And again, if you don't have an answer by the date that they said, call. And you can repeat that as many times as you'd like. If you need to be annoying, why not? You can also accept an aide or a legislative director if possible as the last resort. There are also a lot of times the staff members who will be reporting to the congressperson. So if you can convince them, you can also do research on them to see how to get them on board. We also have a little thing about how to set up a meeting. So forming your group, 2 to 6 individuals. You can have a facilitator from Move to Amend, and those who are willing to share a compelling story and who might have a previous relationship with that person is really helpful, as well as individuals who are constituents or some kind of relevant party. Who not to bring is people who ran against them, people who have poor relationship prior, and anyone who has who's part of a group that has a poor relationship to them prior. So you're not there to start fights as much as you might want to. And I think it's important, you can be grounded in that. You're trying to get a co-sponsor for this. try to engage with the person through storytelling, kind of breaking that ice and then reconnecting them, I feel like is helpful. I don't think you need to hide your personality. I think being your genuine self is also important. And, people can see through when you're trying to BS them. But I also think it's important to stay grounded in that goal, especially when someone might not be as easy to lobby as you'd like to. And then also it's important to have kind of between those many individuals, 3 to 6, because within 30 minutes, you want to get what you need to get across, but also not have random floating people in the group, unless they can be engaging in some other way. They can be in the background holding signs, making their background, interactive, especially if it's on a Zoom, on which I would recommend still. It might be a little easier also to get into. But yeah, you don't want people just kind of like sitting there. And you could find ways to make them interact with your storytelling and your goals for that meeting. And then here's just a list of, if people want to take a screenshot of things to assemble for the meeting that can help you. So petition signers or numbers, amendment language that you can send them, a list of supportive organizations and resolutions, the white paper we have, further recommended background resources. So you can, and we would recommend you email them before the meeting, these materials, so that they kind of know what to expect. And then you can also follow up with any information that they may want to know.
And Dolores, if I may interject,
course.
for those not familiar, Move to Amend keeps a roster of people who have signed our petition, seeking to support HJR 48 at an individual level. And if people are curious about how many or who in their own congressional district have signed that petition, please feel welcome to reach out to anyone on staff and we can pull down that information and share it.
Yes, absolutely. And we have a bunch of information, a bunch of papers. So if there's anything you can think of that you might want or need for a meeting, just let one of us know, and I'm sure we can help, locate it on the website. We have just like a plethora of information there. So this is just for prepping for the meeting. It's kind of, like any other meeting that you would have. You want to have an agenda, want to review materials, decide roles, kind of have a commitment of who does what part, ask someone to research the representative and their priorities and points of view. And if you're using Zoom, make sure that everyone is familiar with the technology and able to navigate it well, so that you don't have any technical issues during your call. Usually what we do is have like a 15-minute, 30-minute before the meeting conversation, just to make sure that we're all set on the agenda, who's doing what, and then, a meeting before that to assign roles and kind of figure that out. So prior to the meeting, these are optional actions, but usually helpful. So you can make phone calls to the local office, letters to the editor, supportive picketing, or vigiling at the office. These are, are a mix of virtual and in person. So if you are doing a Zoom, you don't want to show up to their office necessarily. That would be a little awkward to be like from your phone outside of their office. But anything to put either pressure or kind of have support for them is always helpful. So this is a basic agenda. Don't need to go through it, but just introductions, thank them for something they've done before, make the ask, which is, to co-sponsor HJR 48. give them a brief introduction of it, a brief overview, and then make the direct ask, and then give any questions or answers that they might have. And you can follow up with email or, however they prefer, and try to get like a timeline of when they can expect an answer. More things is just sharing stories, again, kind of like breaking the ice and connecting the room. And, at the end of the meeting, you always want to thank them for meeting with you. Even if they say no, it's important to keep up those relationships. And, that you got the time to do that. And then follow up is probably the most important thing, is send a thank you. I like to do a small summary of what we went over, email that. Send a thank you note. That's also really always appreciated. And then tell the constituents to send emails, send an email blast to them, to call and to keep pressure up. And in 2 weeks, send an email or call the office to ask for a response. So you can be persistent, keep trying until you get a response. So, yeah. And well, first of all, does anyone have any questions about just that kind of structure, how it might adjust to the needs that you have for your representative? Feel free to, Susan?
Would you expect them to engage in like a normal sort of conversation? I mean, does that happen? I mean, do people just have normal conversations and not, presenting policies or presenting whatever? I mean, would that be expected on any level, or is one to expect being, sort of, boilerplate BS?
I think it would depend on the person. Just like anyone else, some people are expecting small talk. I always do in the beginning, just to introduce ourselves, where we're from, where we are, why we're there. But also to keep in mind that you do usually just have 30 minutes, and to be mindful of both your time and their time. I think that overall people are grateful when you're like to the point and don't try to fluff it up too much. Like I said before, like people can pretty easily see through BS. But you can have small talk, say, how's the weather in DC, whatever. I think that's totally acceptable. And, talking to people like they're humans is usually
Yeah, the human
wanted.
thing is what I was thinking about. Humans. All right.
Yeah. And I mean, I think you can even relate, be like, oh, I saw that thing that you did before. Like, how are you feeling coming back from that? Just engaging with their work as well.
Susan, maybe a question for you as somebody who campaigned for public office. Surely there were times where you felt maybe a boilerplate response was the most effective thing to deliver. What were things you noticed were effective from those you spoke with?
Well, I have a real quick answer for that. My whole point was to try to find points of commonality between Democrats and Republicans. And usually my only real catchphrase that I would use in those kind of situations was the fact that literally nothing about our red-blue divides that we're generally, see dividing our communities comes up at the commissioner's court. None of that stuff comes up. And so why do we even elect, commissioners based on whether they have an affiliation with Republicans or Democrats? And so that was something that I discussed a lot. So my whole point, and actually my whole point was trying to work with human beings, period, which I avoid a lot these days. I tend to go for canines and felines, and I have doves. And And the only human beings I deal with these days are usually under the age of 18.
Mm.
So I'm kind of soured on adults right now. But no, my whole point and my whole way of looking at the only way I will ever make inroads into people with whom I have serious divides is to find the commonalities. It's my
Mhm.
whole raison d'etre, you know, it's what I'm after. Which is
Mhm.
why I asked that question. It was like, you know, and it's what I think I have a strength at doing. You know, I can pretty much talk to anybody. You know, I can talk to a redneck, a racist, you know, I can talk to anybody because I have a natural ability to, you know, just kind of figure out what they think is interesting and then try to ask them questions about that, which is
Yeah.
often them. You know, every
Mhm.
human being I've pretty much run into loves to talk about themselves. So,
Mhm.
but yeah, that's my quick answer to that. Yeah, I did that all the time. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, and I think that's important. So you already kind of answered your own question, you know?
Well, but I, you know, I think that some of these guys in high office are so used to the BS and so used to, I mean, I'm sure they're more tired of dealing with humans than I am. And that they put up a barrier between themselves
Yeah.
and these annoying people who want to, you know, see them in their office. I have a suspicion of that. And the longer someone's in office, I suspect the taller and wider and thicker that wall becomes. So
Yeah.
that it's very hard to find the human being, you know, behind the office. It's a
Yeah.
suspicion. I'm not totally sure.
Mm.
From my experience, I think that's pretty accurate, especially if it's, you know, a lot of Congress people are also generational and familial. And so it's like a culture of only
Right.
being able to have those walls up, because if not, people will, you know, people are going to attack your haircut. So yeah, I think that's accurate. Janice, sorry, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Susan, you and I completely agree. Is my underlying principle. What I'm finding is, well, for example, I also support National Infrastructure Bank, and that's a lot easier than Move to Amend because it's halfway into the present structure and it's halfway moving out of it. Move to Amend is just flat, you know, on the other side of the mountain. So the hard thing about Move to Amend is I would guess that none of them want to lose their corporate financial base. So we're at support something that they're absolutely not going to do. The only
Right.
way they're going to do it is if they feel a fear of being voted out if they don't do it. So in addition to working congressional levels, I have a couple inroads into Al Green's office in Houston and Sylvia Garcia's office. My school, where I attend paralegal school, is in Sylvia Garcia's district, so that's very convenient. They're going to be probably less hostile, but you just don't know behind the scenes how much money this is worth to them. And money's everything, as we know, which is why we're even doing this. So that's the basic bone of contention. So if I can cordially meet them and just let them know, basically my mission is to let them know this is up. Okay, buddies, you know, this is up, and I'm going to tell you in the sweetest, nicest little old lady way that I can. Number two, I'm going to be working on people who they consider to be important and critical to their base, and like school districts, like I go to San Jacinto College, like I don't know, Harris County County Commissioners Board, you know, and even they are not necessarily interested in losing their corporate financial base. But the more pressure that I feel like I can apply at every single joint, every single moving part underneath is just what I'm doing. I'm just talking to everybody. But of course, ultimately, we want to end up with the Congress people who are going to vote and get this done. But I really think that also including a lot of layers of lower level people who are not decision makers are going to influence the congressional people much more than we can when we go in and say, why don't you give up all your corporate money and, just go home and farm, for tomatoes or something? No, that's just not going to happen. So that I just want to offer that as kind of a recap of what I've sort of come to so far.
Yeah, I think that's terrific, Janice. And it touches on a lot of the core values that Greg spoke about at the beginning of the call, the focus on solidarity organizing, the focus on coalition building, on grassroots efforts. It's terrific that you're doing that work. And I think Susan and you are fully aligned on doing that through common ground and interpersonal collection. It's terrific.
And this is a great leeway to Greg's metaphor, which is our last slide.
Well, before getting to that, just two comments real quick that have come up related from what Susan and Janice mentioned. Most of the time when we contact and have contacted congressional offices and have had meetings there, we have not met with the aide. We have not met with the representative, him or herself directly, because it's very difficult. Just as you say, Susan, they do have the walls. They do have the gatekeepers. They consider themselves, extremely important, and just meeting with, the grunts, their constituents, just is not a real big deal for them, unless you can amass a group of people who they consider to be, VIPs, who can organize people on their behalf to help elect or re-elect them, since they're already in power. So basically, who we're meeting with are aides. They're the people who we hope are their legislative aides who deal with issues around either money in politics or the lead, their attorney, their lead counsel, or people who deal with, business in some way that would deal with, corporate entities, whoever that may be. We would like to meet with the representative, but 95% of the time it is with an aide. And so when it is with an aide, that relationship and that conversation would probably, and most of the time, is very different than when we meet with the representative themselves. The aide can't on the spot say yes or no. They're there just to take information, ask questions, sort of share in general where the candidate stands, but specifically, they're not going to. They're not empowered. They're not the decider. So all they would do is take the information. If they've asked questions and we've been able to answer, they noted. If we haven't been able to answer them, then we'll get back to them with information, send documents, whatever the case may be, and they then just are the carriers and will report to the congressperson. So the conversation in general, as a result, is pretty good, is very respectful. Most of the time it's one way. It's us going to them, since we know these issues better than they do. We know these issues around corporate constitutional rights better than they do. And so we're educating them. We're trying to win them over. So that's the one thing. And then the other point is, there's a lot of materials that when you mention, and whoever, I think Susan mentioned, of, trying to deal with people who are opposed to us. How do we connect to them? How do we communicate with them? It's quite right to try to start with where they're at. And the default position around what we're trying to do is to say this is a conservative issue. At one point, originally in this country, money was not a form of free speech. Corporate entities did not have constitutional rights. What has happened between the founding of the country and today is been quote unquote radical. It's been very different than what was originally intended. So in a sense, we're just trying to go back to a point where at one time it once was, where we the people and those we elected defined what corporations could or could not do via charters and the like. And there's just you were lucky in Texas, because Texas is where the Populist Party began. in the, century and a half ago. And it was the populists of the other kind of, compared to the populists who were running around and self-identify as populists today, the frightening kind. But the populists of the small d democracy kind, hey, they were born in Texas. So you have a legacy, you have a history there that goes way back and is way deep. And these were people who were way concerned about the railroad corporations and the banking corporations. That's those two things. And the agriculture corporations. Those are what got the populace going. And I think all those kind of companies still ain't respected today in any, and add the fossil fuel companies with them. So I think Texans have got a leg up on many other states in connecting with principled conservatives. So just by way of background. And we do have some materials, a couple of flyers that sort of give talking points on how and why this issue is a conservative issue that we can share with you. So anyway, this photo you have or image you have with you here is represents sort of a metaphor. You'll notice that this person has a hammer, and they are trying at the moment to forge steel. And if you think about it, when steel is cold, it's pretty darn tough, is it not, to try to shape it and mold it. But when you heat it up, when you get it going, when you get all that action and get movement taking place inside that steel, and how you get all those atoms and particles inside moving like crazy is you apply heat to it. And when you apply heat to it, it now becomes available to be molded and shaped by whoever it is that has that hammer. And there is a connection there with what it is we're trying to do. When things are quiet, when things are in status quo, when things are normal, it's damn tough to bring about change. But when things are in crisis, when things are unpredictable, when things are moving toward, if not already in, a certain degree of chaos, when things have been heated up and people outside the political establishment, outside the economic establishment, outside sort of the top-down bureaucracy are in motion, in moving, are heating up, are organizing, are agitating, are coming together, are the ones who have the hammer, there's an opportunity to shape it and mold it in ways that promote justice and peace and democracy and sustainability. So now is the time, I think, given where we are at this moment in our history, in this country anyway, if not around the world, where things are heating up. And that heating up in that steel will be shaped one way or another, if not by us, then by others who have their hand on their hammer. So the question is, who is going to be sort of on point, and what hammer is going to be working to shape the status quo as it is heated up? That is up to us. And so it's really up to us to do what we can to make and shape this in ways that promote justice, peace, and democracy. So those are ways you can reach us to discuss anything related to what we're addressing and to help. And that includes anyone who may be listening or watching this. If you are in Texas and you want to approach your representative's office, what you have seen are things that we can go over in more in detail, but also with you one-on-one, and help you identify people in your congressional district who can be with you to be a part of a constituency group of constituents to meet with your rep and work on them to become original co-sponsors. And Dahl, you're on mute.
Yeah, that was the last slide. So I know you were talking throughout the presentation, but if anyone has any, last questions, comments you want to share?
No, not from my end. I think this has been a terrific training. Thank you both for for
Thank
doing
you.
it for us. And we'll share the recording today, as well as the recording of our previous conversation with some slides to educate yourself and others about the issues at hand and why they may be relevant to your representative. And please stay tuned for future events that we'll be holding relative to the state of Texas.
Thank you very much, all of y'all.
Yeah, it was a
Nice-
pleasure
nice to
talking
meet
to you
you
all.
and some of you again. Yes, I'll be
Absolutely.
back.
Well, whether you want to go after Roy or somebody else, an adjoining district, we're here to help. And
Where
think
is
it-
Lloyd Doggett on all this?
he was an endorser last
Yeah.
session.
I figured he would be, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's the only good person we have for miles around. Well, Greg
Mhm.
Kazar now, we have him, but, yeah. No, I mean, and in Texas, like, I guess a lot of places, our government doesn't reflect the populace.
Right.
Most Texans are not what it looks like we are if you were just to judge us from our elected officials. Texans aren't really like that. But we allowed, like a lot of people did, we allowed a bunch of, yahoos to run for office and win, and now they run our lives. And we're sitting here going, what happened? And it's very hard to undo that because they've gotten entrenched and they've gotten corporate backing, and running for office is incredible.